Well, good morning, and well, as it's international, it might not be morning, but welcome. I'm Roger Gomm. I'll just introduce the workshop and the panel to you in a second. You may spot that we've got a small audience in the background. They're the ones that couldn't get online, but I think it's nice to have some people there because they may be able to ask some questions towards the end, which would be helpful. I'll just this workshop is around public order, policing of public order predominantly, and it's the principles of communication. I'm just going to very quickly break that down as we're going to look at it. Communications within the police. I'll be the first to admit, I don't always get it right. There's a lot of work we need to do there. Then it's communications with protesters. I would have an interesting perspective from my colleague on the left, who I'll introduce in a second. Communications with the media. Presented some real challenges, quite reputational damaging in recent years for the police service. Then communications with the public, and I'd always include our sort of partners and the business community there. So they're the sorts of areas, but it's we've got quite a broad spectrum. And I'm going to start with Roger Hallam on my left-hand side here. So Roger is, I'm going to call you the Chief Executive of Extinction Rebellion. Is that correct?
Not quite, but
okay, yeah. Go on then. Put me right. So what's the best way to describe you? Sort of a leader of?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for inviting. It's slightly scary, but see what I can do. Yeah, I mean, I was the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. I did a lot of the academic research that led to its founding. I was a researcher at King's College for 5 years. And since then, I co-founded Insulated Britain, which you may know about, and I co-founded Just Stop Oil, and I do like strategic work for Just Stop Oil. I also work internationally advising civil disobedience movements around the Western world.
So you'll see just from that short introduction from Roger, fantastic first name, that we've got we're going to have a different perspective here, which I think is really positive. But I'm going to move on to Simon Evans, who's very recently retired from the Metropolitan Police Service. Do you just want to say a few words about your background, Simon?
Yeah, so hello everybody. Simon Evans. I retired from the Metropolitan Police about 4 months ago after 37 years service, most of which was spent in and around Westminster, in the right in the middle of London. Also a fair chunk of time in Lambeth and Hounslow as well. A number of foreign postings as well, where I've worked abroad. My involvement with public order has been going on many years, at all ranks, up to and including Chief Superintendent. A plethora of royal and ceremonial events I was involved in central London, including the wedding of the now Prince and Princess of Wales, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge as they were, but also the huge pop concerts that used to be held in Hyde Park, where we'd have 80,000, 90,000 people were under my command as a gold commander for many years as well.
Excellent. Next there is Beverley Griffiths. Beverley is someone I've known for many years. Started off, I'm going to have to go back in history. We had a siege in Hackney, and Beverley was the local emergency planning officer, sorting out all the local authority issues. I then met her at the Emergency Planning College and thought, well, I know you from Tamworth, and you were there for a number of years, but she's now at the New Bucks University doing resilience. I'm sure you're going to put me right, but just say hello, Beverley, and just what you do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roger, for showing my age a little bit there, aren't you? But I don't mind. Yeah, so I'm a senior lecturer and a researcher at Bucks University into organisational risk and resilience, but we also cover emergency response as well with that. Roger's alluding to my quite a few decades, I think, in the Cabinet Office, Emergency Planning College, where I was the lead on public safety and indeed edited and helped write the Purple Guide, the Green Guide, and the Working Safety Advisory Group Guide. Yeah. So and I think the terrorism strategy chapter as well. So that's
Excellent. And finally, on the far side, there is Bob Broadhurst. Some of you may know Bob was the gold commander for untold number of events. You can work it out in a second, Bob, but in finishing with the London Olympics. Bob, do you just want to say a few words about your background?
Yeah, no, thank you, Roger. Like Simon, a former officer in the Metropolitan Police for 36 years, now retired for 10 years, and spent probably the whole career doing public order in one way, shape or form, starting as a PC and working my way through, and ending up as the head of public order for the Met, which meant I was in charge of policy, doctrine, training, as well as managing some of those big events. And I think just worth throwing out there now, public order has a very wide definition about the types of things that we're going to talk about, and not all of them are the protests, the things that make the headlines. And the police in the UK is pretty good at it, which is what I now do in retirement, taking that British model around the world, and it really does work. But for me, the interesting thing is, because for me, public order policing is about reputations. And if you look at some of the bigger jobs I did, including the Olympics, the Royal Wedding, G20s, where I was called a liar by Keith Vaz, amongst other things, half of those jobs, the Metropolitan Police were challenged either through judicial review or coroner's court in the case of Ian Tomlinson with G20, or even the Royal Wedding, which I thought was a success. We were actually challenged because we were seen to, and this is right in Roger's territory, stopping people protesting. That was taken to judicial review, found in favour of the Met in the UK courts, appealed, found in favour of us again by the Supreme Court, taken to Europe, and 8 years later comes back from Europe still in our favour. So all these issues are really pertinent, and you're challenged every time you do a public order event. And I think those issues will certainly come out in terms of communication, sometimes lack of communication at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Bob. So I think you've got a panel. Just a little bit of my background. I'm also a retired police officer, heavily involved in public order throughout my career. In fact, Simon and I stood outside of Westminster Abbey for the Royal Wedding. You just reminded me, and I've been doing, as Bob's told me, for a number of years on all told operations as a police officer, and I've had the privilege to operate at sort of strategic, tactical, and operational gold, silver, and bronze level on numerous events. A bit like Bob, I've had the pleasure of going around the UK and lots of other countries, telling them how we do it and what they can learn from us. I think we'd always make the point, we're not telling them how to do it, we're just sharing our experience to help guide them for the future. One of the interesting points that come up in that sort of introduction is the consent and balance bit. You know, policing is about the consent, and we've been getting that balance right. Is, you know, when we're dealing with a protest group, our biggest challenge is getting the balance between the protesters and the wider public, including business. So that might just be an interesting place just to kick it off. Anyone sort of the consent and balance bit? Anyone start me off there, just as in general? Because I think taking Bob's theme there of reputation, that's where we've been.
I think as every well, may or may not know, there's always a gold strategy for any event that you're in charge of policing as a gold commander. In that you will lay out your broad strategy, and it will contain a number of things. One thing it always contains is to facilitate lawful protest. So we understand right from the beginning, part of our role is to facilitate lawful protest. I think where the contentious part then comes in is my view of what lawful protest is as the gold commander may be very different from the protesters' view, or a member of the public's view, or the people partaking in the actual event that we're policing. And to draw that balance and to make strategic plans to allow that can often bring us into conflict. And that's where, going right to the heart of this seminar, communication to all parties, including hopefully the protesters, is so important. So we try and start off on the right foot.
And do you want to take that a bit further, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably just early on, just a bit of context setting. You know, the Met every year, certainly 10 years ago, was doing around about 4,000 large-ish public order jobs a year, and probably 95% of that will go completely under the radar because they were well managed, well policed, and the communication was good with the people that were. And it's not all about protests; it's also some other events. But I was always the view, and Simon's absolutely right. talking about communications, it starts with the strategy. The strategy is, what do I want to happen? And it's all about, I don't want anybody to get hurt, I don't want the law to be broken, I want people to protest within the limits of the law, certainly in our case, and so on. But I was always of the view that every event, be it a protest, football match, concert, whatever, took part in the community. So for me, I always saw public order policing as a continuation of community policing. And in the old adage, when we'd finished an event and took our resources away, whatever they may be, someone still had to police that community the next day, and you wanted to leave with that favourable impression. So I think the consensus bit there, for me, is always there. The real challenge, and I think we'll get into this as the debate opens up, is we the police, are seen as the custodians of authority. We can only work to the law, and that's part of our decision making. We must know what our law and policy says we can do. And if you step outside of that, you step outside of the code. But actually, what you're policing is rarely one homogenous group of people. Even if it's a football match, you've got at least two contrasting people who've got a different view of what you're doing. And that's where the challenges around consensus start to come in. Because everybody will have a different view of what should be happening to them or for them at this particular event, no matter what the event is. And if you multiply that by more than 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, suddenly that consensus becomes much more challenging.
Roger, have you a view on this balance and consensus with, the police are there and they're trying to get the balance right? I'd be the first to admit, don't always achieve it. Certainly when I was there, it's a juggling act. What's it from your perspective when you sort of think about the consent balance debate?
Well, can I make a sort of general comment?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
We're going to be discussing a number of different issues here today. And there's a tendency in human nature to categorize what is in front of you on the basis of your past experience. And so you use the categories of your past experience to project onto the present situation, which 9 times out of 10 is a really good way of operating, but it's not always the best way of operating. And as everyone knows, there's a principle of adaptation, isn't there, in evolution, that if a species or group or a society can't adapt to new circumstances, then ultimately it'll go extinct, or ultimately there'll be a crash. So when I'm going to be answering the questions, I'm going to be introducing the idea that we're in a situation where we need to adapt to new circumstances, which involves creating new categories. And these categories are threatening, of course, by definition, because they contradict old categories. But if we are going to adapt collectively, we need to be brave enough to see sometimes we do need to create new categories. So that's a general point. A more specific point is when we set up Extinction Rebellion, our proposition to the police was that we were a new category, right? In the sense that maybe when the police approached us, they had 2 categories in mind. They had conventional protest, Friends of the Earth, A to B march, fine, everyone's, goes along nice and peacefully. And then their other category was, for the sake of argument, a riot, right? A disorganized, violent, like one of you said, there's different elements in the crowd, it's not organized, it could get into a public disorder situation. So when we went to the police at the beginning of Extinction Rebellion, we said, we're actually a new category, guys, right? It's called civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, in terms of its sort of ideal type, as it were, has a number of characteristics. First of all, a civil disobedience movement talks to the police, number one. Secondly, it talks to the police in an organised way. It's not like I come to the police and say, hey, I'm Roger, I've got a few ideas. It's like I'm coming on representing an organisation. And I'm subject to that organisation. And as some of you may know, before April 2019, it was a seminal moment in British history with civil disobedience. You know, I had about 8 or 9 meetings with the police with my colleagues. The other category sort of is we're breaking the law, but we're breaking the law in a peaceful way, right? And that's different, as I said, something that goes into the riot category. And at the end of the 10 days of that episode, the gold standard guy, I've forgotten what the right phrases are, he came to me and he congratulated me and said, I've never had a policing event where people have broken the law, where no police officer has been harmed by 10,000 people over 10 days. And I said, yeah, well, that's because it's organised civil disobedience, right? We don't allow people just to go on the road willy-nilly. It's like you need to go to a non-violence training. And if you're not, you know, psychologically okay, or if you're, you know, a person that might be violent, you're not allowed to do it, or not under the banner of Extinction Rebellion. So I suppose what I'm here to say is that that invites the police to have an appropriate reaction to us. And, you know, I'm here to say the Metropolitan Police did have an intelligent response, which hasn't been replicated on sister movements in Paris, for instance, right? Probably we know about that, right? But that enabled, as far as I saw it, as a definition of conflict, which was partially cooperation, but partially conflict. And again, this is a challenge because we like to have this category, everything's consensual, or they're the enemy and we're in conflict. But in civil disobedience, there's a sort of ambiguity, isn't there? It's like these nice people, they're having a nice chat with us and they're breaking the law. What do we do? So it requires a subtlety of response, which broadly speaking happened during the Extinction Rebellion, April 13. One thing we might want to come on to, which is, you know, which should be talked about in regard to protest is politics. If we talked about the law, so we all know what the law is, but we're all supposed to be realists in this room, and we also know there's a thing called politics, and we need to assess the political influence on the police and the political influence on a non-violence movement to work out where we're going to go forward. So I've got a few other things to say, Darren, but I'll shut up.
That's really quite insightful way to start, because Bob and I will definitely remember G20 adapting to protest. We were told by a Magistrates Inspector of Constabulary that we needed to adapt quite severely, and part of that was our speaking to protest groups or communication to protest groups, and it caused us a lot of challenges, angst within the organisation. And eventually it did lead to us to, well, it actually led to me having a trip to Sweden to look at the dialogue police in Sweden, which was something we brought back and used quite heavily in London, where we actually ensured that we had designated police officers to work alongside our protest groups, but they weren't all peaceful, which I think is the key point there. I don't know if you can remember those days, but because they were difficult.
I can, Roger. And broadly, Roger, I agree with a lot of what you say, particularly around the communications and the dialogue and what we see. You know, just take a simple, football thing. Go back to football policing in the 80s, 1780s. Those of you probably only seen this on television. The days when we used to cage spectators in, so they couldn't get on the pitch because we were the bad boys of the world in terms of football. So the police treated every football spectator as a hooligan, as an animal, basically. And it was literally them and us. That's clearly wrong to pretty vast sins. And that's the same with protests. We didn't speak to them. One of the big things that came out of the G20 was around no surprises. So better dialogue with protesters. But I think if I can just challenge a couple of issues there before we really get into the world of communication. First of all, I don't think that you were the first group to have civil disobedience. We were dealing with in the 80s with Reclaim the Streets, where they used to put tripods at either end of the roads, sling that, somebody underneath it, and then fill the road with sand, and have a street party for days on end. And the issue was, if we didn't get there first, then claim the high ground, as it were, we knew we'd lost it for 3 days. We went into this. Probably the dialogue then wasn't as good. So I think you need to bear that in mind. And I also challenge the issue that I don't think police really just look at what's in front of them as a binary good people, bad people. When we have, when we know an event is coming, we have a strategy. Self as goal, as Simon or Roger's goal, to say, okay, what's the intelligence? What is this event about? Who's coming? Okay, who's coming? What do they want to do? What do they want to achieve? And we generally do our best to allow them to achieve it, because that's best all round. But then, Roger, you'll find, well, there's another group's going to counter that, and another group's going to counter that. And just finally, one of the things that came out of G20 that I still oppose to this day, because it was directed at me. I was the gold commander for G20 when Ian Thomas was pushed in the back of the I saw that happen on camera. It's in my decision log. I've seen this happen, and I did what any police officer would do when you have an unexplained death. I treated it as exactly the same. I said the bronze crime down there to make it a crime scene, to seal up the crime scene, to gather evidence, capture the victims. Because in my decision log, I don't know whether this person's had a heart attack, whether he's been attacked by other protesters, whether he's been mugged, or whether indeed he's been struck by police. I don't know. So I make it a crime. Then that whole thing is taken out of me. I'm not allowed to say anything again about it because it's now within the complaints space. That needs to come out when we talk about crimes. But anyway, cut a long story short, when it was decided to have all these, and there were about 10 different inquiries into that, it wasn't just HMIC, Parliament had one, European courts had one, everybody. And I was the poor mug who got 250 recommendations there. But Dennis O'Connor, who was a former chief constable, was head of HMI6, brought in a barrister from Northern Ireland, who was schooled in the Northern Ireland policing scenario, which is very, very heavily around human rights. And it was when you read human rights legislation, it says the starting point for protest should be peaceful protest rather than lawful. Exactly the point. Personally, I argued against that. My view is policing is about upholding the law. Therefore, we must start with lawful. If it's peaceful, fine. And if they're not bothering anybody else, well, then get on with it. Exactly your point. The challenge is, Roger, and again, I'll go back to the G20. Whilst all the kerfuffle was going on in the back of climate campers put their tents down in Bishopsgate, a main thoroughfare through the city of London. And they told us beforehand, we're going to camp there for 24 hours and block the city. And I said, you're not. Because that would be unlawful, it would be blocking the highway. We had to, because we were over here, we let them get on with it for several hours. And then around about midnight, I made the decision, we need to clear this street because the city of London is not functioning and it needs to function. That is a national issue, it's around the economy of the country. By camping in the street, that is highway obstruction. You've had your protest, my decision. So this is where, none of this gets written in law, Roger. This is decisions for us to make. I made the decision. You've had plenty of time to make your protest. You've had the publicity. Everybody's seen what the climate change is about. You're now breaking the law. You're obstructing the highway. And we arrested several hundred people. That's one of those cases that went to Europe, came back from Europe and found in our favour. Because one of the contrasting things, as a gold commander, you're trying to balance the rights and needs of protesters against the rights and needs of everybody else to go about their business. And at some stage, someone has to make that decision. And those are the decisions that I've said before are challenged all the time in the courts, the judicial review, or indeed higher level. And that's one of the issues about decision making. So my view is, public order terms, nothing really is new. If you look at police tactics, shield tactics, they're Roman tactics. Who else would go around with shields? The Romans were doing that 2,000 years ago. So nothing is really new in public order. The real challenges where these concentration is these colleagues behind me. They are now operating in a spot that we never operated in terms of social media. We used to talk about, nostalgically, the golden hour. You've had a golden hour. You've had to have golden 10 seconds now before what you're dealing with is and then everybody has a view of what we should and shouldn't be doing. But there is still one person in charge of that operation who's got to make those decisions. Will be advised by any sorts of other people. Politicians can say what they like on the telly. Senior officers can come into the gold suite. Who will say to them, "Are you part of the command chamber?" No, then that's a and it's down to one of us or a colleague somewhere in the country to make those decisions. And that's the challenge. And I think that's where all the communication. What we're not good at, Roger, was communicating what we did, why we did it, when we did it. Sorry,
No, that's all right. I'll definitely come back to that. And you've obviously started off an interesting debate, because I was thinking when you were talking about Gandhi and the protests in India, though, but that was civil disobedience, really, to achieve a political idea, all those years ago. Beverley, you haven't had the chance to say anything. Do you want to join at this stage? Or?
Yeah, no, I will do. And I think Bob said it eloquently. The way we, and I think we have changed, and I think the my colleagues here have helped that change, because in the 80s there was very much a them and us. To crowds and looking at what Roger said earlier about terminology that we used to use perhaps, and we've changed that, and I think my colleagues here have helped change that around the place, and we've understood the individual needs, the group needs of the crowds that we're dealing with, wherever they may be, whether it be sporting or protesting. And I think there's been a lot of research that's helped us understand that, but also in decision making. I think the police have led a lot in decision making and helping that informed decision about the wide consequences, as you've said.
No, well, I tend to agree with you. I'm going to come back, trying to keep us on track and talk with the communication. It says within the police service, but I'm very keen to hear what Roger said. And I was actually quite pleased to hear that you actually not vet your staff, but brief your staff, make sure you've got the right people. They're not going to get into confrontation at the drop of a hat, which would have an impact on your reputation as a protest group, especially when you're trying to be peaceful, accepting what Bob says, that we've got this balance between what we said peaceful and the lawful piece. So that's really quite interesting. But I think as my colleagues have alluded to, we don't always get the communication right within the police service. I think when I reflect back, our briefings to our, if you like, our team leaders, generally inspectors, sometimes sergeants, was pretty good. You never really understood how that was cascaded down. Did the people going to be doing the work, the constables and the sergeants, really understand what it was we were trying to achieve? And that was one of our, I think, biggest challenges. I don't know if either of my two colleagues want to comment there. You were nodding, Simon.
Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah.
So, certainly, and there are always issues around the scale of the event. So if you were policing an event with maybe a dozen cops, you could go and look them in the eye and tell them exactly what you wanted. If you were policing the scale of thing you talked about, Bob, and the massive pop concerts, then it was very, very difficult to get to individual officers. And in many ways, technology, I think, has harmed that a bit more, because it's almost made us take a step back and say, well, we can do a broadcast, we can do a Teams meeting, and then that will get cascaded. Wherever possible, I tried to actually brief large groups of officers myself, and not just the inspectors and the sergeants. But if I had a chance to get 50, 100 of the constables together, then I would stand there and do that. And I would take time to go through my goal strategy and say, this is what I want, and then sit there whilst the silver commander and the bronze commanders then did their bit. I really don't think you can beat that opportunity for the boss, if you like, to look in the eye of the people that are going to be delivering all this and say, this is what I want, this is what I'm expecting, these are the parameters I want you to work within, and this is the event, this is what it's all about. So they've got my view. And interestingly, I think technology has made that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
You may be able to get to more people, but who knows what they're actually doing while when you're talking to them? Are they actually listening? Are they just a bubble on the screen? Whereas you could actually look and you could pick up the concentration of the officers, whether they're interested, whether they're engaging. You could even ask questions if you wanted. And then when I was then held to account, as Bob has mentioned, I knew that I'd done the best I could on the day to get my feelings and views across.
Can I ask a question? What effort did you put into your communication with the rest of the force as such, the briefing, in the words that you chose to set that tone? Because there's been quite a bit of research as to that communication and setting the tone, and the use of words, as Roger says, sometimes the use of words can put pictures in people's minds of what's coming. And I know there's quite a bit of research still going on at the moment with Keele University about those choice of words and setting that scene of the event and the police operations.
I think I was probably renowned for hating management first of all, so I would just try and just try and explain it as it was. You know, that the morning of the event or the evening of the event was the pinnacle of days, weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even a longer amount of work. And you had all this knowledge and connections of people that you had in your mind, and that was then your chance to try and download some of that. But you know, a basic form of communication is being able to talk to in the audience, isn't it? To go from on the phone to the commissioner or Bob, when I was working in as Gomm commander, to the newest, most inexperienced officer that's got to go and deliver.
I think you sort of highlight, I'll come back to a second, I think you highlight for both of you there is, you know, we're talking to, if you like, the people that are going to go and do the work. Often we're not communicating as well up to our more senior colleagues who will be watching the newsreel.
And often becoming very nervous about
Yes,
what they were saying.
absolutely. And we've all been there when you get a phone call from the commissioner or the staff officer to the commissioner saying, "Are you sure you got enough resources? You know, what are we doing about this? And what are we doing
Were
about
you
that?"
aware that this
Yes.
was happening?
Yeah.
So-
I remember a Notting Hill carnival where the police officers were covered in the colours of Notting Hill Carnival, shall we say, and a senior officer getting a call from up above going, "What's happening?" And he said, "Well, we're enjoying a community event, we're policing a community event." And that's changed over the years of that communication
Yeah.
and that understanding of what the events are about.
And
as
seems
well.
to swing backwards and forwards.
It does.
Because
Yeah.
we seem to be going more authoritarian again at the moment,
Yes.
I think, in what you wear and what you won't wear and what you would do. I heard, for instance, at this year's Notting Hill Carnival, you know, there was to be no dancing with the
Lots of
crowd,
knots
which had always become sort of part, so within
Yeah.
reason,
Yeah.
part of the thing, and broke down. But I'd heard for the first time in many, many years, I wasn't at the carnival this year.
Yeah.
Because you know, the dancing had been stopped. And I hear, I don't know, probably somehow that came from very high up in the organisation about a concern about what we would look
Yeah.
at.
And some of that's that education of higher up, isn't it? That communication of education higher up. Because actually, we're talking here about communication with people, but it's that trust, isn't it? And that relationship with our audience, whether they are the protesters, the sports fans, etc. And we learnt that in the London Olympics, didn't we, with our volunteers?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's about being part of the event.
Yeah.
And I think communication is about how we're
Yeah,
behaving as
it
well.
is. You know, but just to touch on something, I think part of the issue is that, funny enough, having this discussion with an old Chelsea pensioner last night. I think the issue around dancing at the carnival wasn't around police officers joining in the fun and dancing with anybody within reason. It was, in this case, it was wearing pride colours. In the past, we've seen police officers at certain events taking a knee. It's when policing is seen, rightly or wrongly, to be lining up with what could be seen to be a political stance on, which again is fine for that particular. But all the others who may have a different view on that, suddenly you've lost your impartiality piece. So I think that, you know, that's perhaps a tangential issue. But yeah, just coming back to the points around communicating and briefing. Briefing is clearly a crucial part of what we do. And I've worked in other countries. I work in Lebanon, in Beirut, and they don't really brief. So officers turn up, they haven't got a clue why they're there, they haven't got no intelligence, they haven't got the picture, they just respond with high-end violence. So briefing is key. But, you know, Simon's right. When we're dealing with big events, you're relying on cascade proofs. So your briefing is only as good as the inspector or sergeant being putting the message across. Which then becomes key. What is the actual message I want, Simon wants, or wants as the goal commander? What do you want your officers? Because no one, you know, guessing as a PC, has ever gone to a public order event and read a 7-page strategy of what goal would test. Why would you? Yeah, that strategy is crucial because it sets the tone for the Metropolitan Police on that event. And if you look at the Royal Wedding, and I can't remember the case now, but it went to the Supreme Court here, and an 80-page judge's ruling, 80 pages. What they asked for is your decision logs, your strategy, and your briefing notes. So your strategy must be properly worded. And where we fell down in the G20, my strategy around public order is, you know, we will facilitate lawful protests, which is where barristers came back to us after and said, you're wrong. As a result of that, whenever I wrote a strategy after G20, I sent it to the next lawyers to say, have a look at this, and they would come back in ready and say, that's about this. That's about protecting yourself going forwards. So your strategy must be written in legalese, it must be written in a way that can be defended in the courts afterwards. But that makes it gibberish to the average officer on the ground, not because of their intellect. They're not going to read that and understand it. So, in terms of communication, the goal commander, the sort of, you must have a form of words that actually means something to people in the room. So, on this event, so actually, the strapline I used at the Royal Wedding was, you know, we're going to allow protests, but we're not going to allow anybody to spoil the party. And there's a kind of a nuance in that. So actually, yeah, if you've got protesters there, fine. You know, there's no such thing in UK law about embarrassing anybody, including the King and the Queen. You've got a banner that, provided it's legally written, so it's not racist or anything else, they can say what they like. What they can't do is throw stuff or batter stuff or try and jump out or be seen to be attacking the VIPs or anything like that. Is a police role to stop that. And that's where, in my mind, the peaceful starts to trip over into war. So you need to, your wording and how you speak to stuff. But the challenge is, particularly Olympics, I had 10,000 officers a day with it. There's no way you can get to 10,000 people every morning saying, right, this is what I want to do. No. Sorry, well, another 900,000 people get to it first before you get it. So you rely on cascading, you rely on other different ways of doing it, but that is the real challenge. Because if that message doesn't get across to the ground floor, we go back to some of the issues we used to have, where they're turning up. And again, I look at the media, the number of times, and we can go back to other events for it, but you read in the media that it's going to be a really challenging day tomorrow, such a group's going to come and attack us. Your officers read that, they're going to turn up thinking it's going to kick off today. You know? So they go automatically to use that with a mindset, this is going to be the tough one. And if we put them in kit, from the outset, they immediately going to think this is going to be a tough old day. And you go into that preservation, you know, what you're trying to do.
So that, Roger, that scene setting, that almost the feel of the event that can come from the Gold Commander is very important psychologically on the officers policing it, but also then the way they transmit that feeling to who's being policed. You know, is this going to be a good day where we want everyone to get along, or is right from the beginning are we expecting a lot of violence or a lot of disruption? And to deal with it accordingly. So the feeling, we don't actually talk about feelings in policing, but the feel of the event, that the Gold Commander has come to the conclusion of over a long period of planning, very important to try and transmit that to everybody. And I think Nottingham Carnival is a fantastic example of that. I police every rank from constable to superintendent. And, I remember certainly as a constable being told right from the beginning, this is going to be really, you're going to get involved tonight. You're going to be there. And you would arrive, as the 19-year-old PC that I was, I would arrive thinking, right, this is going to be beautiful. But as you become older, more sophisticated and more used to things, and the nuance changes, then you can get a very different approach. And that stance of the Gold Commander, the attitude of the Gold Commander, it's really important.
But I think, kind of was another good point. And I come back to Roger's point, for me, one of the strengths of public order policing, probably more than any other aspect of it, is every event is or should be debriefed. So you go through that and you look at what went well, what didn't go quite so well, and what do we need to change tomorrow? To keep officers safe, to keep public safety. So if you look at Carnival, that changed over time. Absolutely. Initially, it was a us. It was a clash. Certainly after it got dark, decent people went home. It was just then the youth and the police nasty at times. But we found after a certain point of time, didn't we, where everybody else had gone home, so you had the youngsters, as it were, you had the police, and we were there in our NATO kits, standing toe to toe with each other. There's nothing happening. But they saw police in kit, we saw them, wanting to hurt.
We throw something at them.
But then we had the really clever idea, well, I tell you what, why don't we have a flat cap on the bell, and then when we get to that situation, let's take our NATO helmets off, put the flat caps on, and just look at these people and talk to them, because you can't talk behind a shield, you're immediately aggressive, so they're immediately aggressive. And actually, just that little step, and it came from the ground floor, that simple expedient of having a clip. If you took your helmet off and put your flat cap on, because you couldn't take your helmet off and leave it, 200 yards down the road, because if it did kick off, you're going to get hurt. But actually having it with you, so the officers felt safe. The youth, the youngsters felt safe because they don't see us scared out. And started talking, we'll go home now. just that simple bit, but it's a learning process, and I do think we certainly try to learn as much as we can.
We can adapt.
We adapt, but sometimes we don't adapt quickly enough. Sometimes we don't get the message through quickly.
And the art.
Let's hear from Roger, because he's tried a couple of times to get you to it, but he started us
I don't
off.
want to engage in any direct action or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to summarise why I've been hearing is that broadly speaking, the public order policing was a lot more polarising and aggressive in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, absolutely.
And as we got into the 90s and 2000s, there's been a more intelligent, hearts and minds approach, as you might say, from policing in Britain. And that's, I think, being paralleled by the development of protest as well, broadly speaking, obviously, from more anarchistic, disorganised, ambiguous about the police, if not hostile, a willingness to engage in low-level violence and such like, through to this professionalisation of protest, as you might say, with going into Extinction Rebellion and saying, we've got protocols, we've got organisation, we've got a leadership structure and such like. And then I think what we're probably all aware of in this room is, and we've sort of alluded to it, is the tide is now turning back to a certain extent. Speculate whether that's structural or not, but towards a more aggressive policing because of legislation. And this is generally reflective of a more polarised society, greater inequality, austerity and such like. And I'm saying that descriptively, I'm not necessarily making a value judgment about it. So I want to say, like, that's all well and good, but I'm going to introduce this new category, dare I say it, to prepare for this evening slightly threatened. But just to look at my own career, in inverted commas, that's a bit of a grand word to call it, but I sat in the road when I was 15 with the peace movement in about 1984. And I've been organising people just about every week on campaigning on social issues for nearly 40 years, since I was 15. So I've seen decades of campaign development. And I've always had a general rule of thumb when I'm advising a campaign that you don't just willy-nilly break the law. It's not like an end in itself. You're trying to win the campaign. So, if you've got litter on a street, to use a slightly extreme example, you don't need to blockade the council, right? You have a petition, you talk to your councillors, and, other things being equal, you're going to win your campaign, right? So that's that category. It's like legal lobbying, The next category is what you might call classical civil disobedience protest. So you say, I've got a point of view. I'm not saying it's objective, or if I am, I'm probably wrong. I want to push my political issue, and I'm going into the public space, and I may break the law. I know I'm breaking the law. I accept I'm breaking the law, but I think I'm justified because my issue is important. And as you were saying, as a police officer, you're responding in a balanced way, going, okay, you can, blockade the road outside the City of London, but you've only got 3 hours because, yes, you've got some validity to make your public, point. But as a police officer, I have a responsibility to wider society to make sure that the roads can move. So if you stay in the road, I'll arrest you. And in the civil disobedience logic, you're willing to be arrested because that creates publicity, creates debate in society, and hopefully you're going to win your issue, right? All well and good within this context of intelligent policing, reasonably intelligent protest. So you'll notice that when in the last 2 or 3 years, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Oil have appeared on the scene, there's been a breakdown in the categorisation consensus, right? Because the police officers come to us and said, you're doing a protest, you're going to sit in the road, you know, that's, you can do it for 10 minutes and then we're going to arrest you. Because it's a protest. And what we've been saying is, no, it's not a protest. It's an act of civil resistance. Now, that could be rhetorical, it could be performative, or it could actually be substantive. Which brings me on to this categorization of when I'm advising a campaign. If it's a little campaign, you don't need to break the law. You know, breaking the law is a bad idea. You know, it's not to be taken lightly. If you've got a serious issue, yes, break the law because you want to put the point across, but it's within limits. But there's another category, which is like objective violation of the Constitution, right? Now, for the last few generations, and certainly for the last 30 years, that just isn't a category within the British context. But we know globally it's a category, right? If you've got a dictator in Algeria or something, right, you're arguably legitimate to close down Algiers because the guy's, you know, the guy's murdering people, running off with all the money, with no legitimacy. And as we all know, or we should know, you know, the police historically have been in the middle on this, and sometimes they side with the dictator, sometimes they side with the crowd because they decide the crowd is the legitimate will of the people. When you're in that category, you're in a different world, right? And my argument to you all is that category is not metaphysically impossible in the British context, right? We live in history and history changes. And when I started researching the climate crisis, the first thing I said to activists is, this is not a protest. It's not an issue, objectively. It is the end of civilization, according to 10,000 peer-reviewed papers, right? So it's not like an ideology. I mean, you might have an ideology, and I'm broadly left wing. That's neither here nor there. So, for instance, I'm just going to quote you from a paper that came out 4 weeks ago, which I'm going to suggest to your generation is going to be a defining statement of the problem of policing over the next 20 years, right? So this is the quote, right? This is the peer-reviewed paper, Energy is very respectable, gold standard, blah, blah, blah. It says, I'm going to be trying to remember it, but it says, if temperatures go over 2 degrees centigrade, the mainly rich of the world will be responsible for killing 1 billion people who are mainly poor in the world due to human-induced climate change, which should be categorized as willful manslaughter. Right? I mean, I think it's 1 or 2 words out, but you notice will. He wasn't saying could. These are people that use could all the time. He's not saying die, he's saying kill. In other words, we're in a situation today, whether you like it or not, where governments, under the influence of various carbon lobbies, are engaged in activities which, if we were outside of this emotional context, if we were looking at 300 years from now, there'll be a consensus in the room that is fundamentally anti-democratic and it's fundamentally unconstitutional in a liberal democratic state, right? If the government decided it was going to start killing black people, you know, by 500 a week, everyone in this room would not be policing that event. So you wouldn't be policing protests, would you? You'd be going, that's outrageous. Sorry, we're the police and we have a constitutional duty. So what I don't want to get into a big debate about, whether it's that bad or this bad, but in so much as that paper is right, I think you need to start considering what the police do in this new category, which is constitutional violation. And my proposition to you all is the police have a responsibility to enact the law. I totally agree with what you've said, right, within that category. But there's another category where the police arguably have a constitutional duty to say we're not going to police that protest because what's happening is violating the Constitution. So, sorry, I'm just giving 2 more minutes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you 3 contemporary examples where this has happened, which, this is history, so it's a little bit messy. But when there was the Gilets Jaunes, I can't pronounce French, you know that, big protests in France, 100,000 people, lots of roads blocked, it was France, it's all very dramatic. The police, on Christmas 2018, went to the French state and said, we're not going out in January because you need to sort it out and you're not paying us enough, like you haven't been paid overtime. So there are two logics. One is the police are not there to endlessly be used by a government to do endless amounts of overtime and not get paid for it, right? There is an objective notion of being abused by a government. That's the first point. The second point is the police are not there to endlessly protect a regime. If a regime violates various objective boundaries, then the police have a constitutional duty to say it's for you to work this out. So example 2, 4 weeks ago, there were 2,500 arrests in The Hague in a single day to demand that the Dutch government stop subsidising fossil fuel companies, right, within this context of that quote. The 4 police unions in Holland made a public statement, and I'll send it to you if you like, because you can have a look at it, a little case study. They made a 2-page statement, and they said, with all due respect, the police do not exist to police a protest, inverted commas, of this magnitude. It's up for the politicians to come down to the street and negotiate, right? Because this was going to go on day after day after day. So what I'm predicting is, as the objective conditions climatically and therefore socially become worse, the most smart role for the police is to rediscover a strategy of communication on a macro level, which makes clear to governments that there are limits. And if you don't do that, you will lose the legitimacy of public support at some point. So maybe it's not now, and you can all pretend that that's what I've said is rubbish. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're thinking about this, in terms of strategy, there's two elements of communication there. As everyone's rightly said, there's communication within the melee, right? Social media, using common sense, balance, professionalism, all well and good. But there's another communication strategy which you need to start thinking about, which you haven't had to think about for 30 years, which is, when do we actually say no, right? That's an important question, particularly for you guys, right? Constitutionally, see what I mean? Not as an act of selfishness, not as an act of disorganisation or ideology, but as an act of democratic duty. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, because it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because a lot of us, and I'm certainly and I'm going to guess some of the younger generation will support a lot of your views. But then we take this oath when we join the police service to uphold the law. And we would normally say to Parliament, if you want us to do something, put some legislation in place to enable us to do it. But we then have this, don't have to arrest everybody, we don't have to charge everybody. We have got a degree of discretion, but what you're suggesting is we need to start thinking about stretching that discretion and think about our constitutional, and are we willing to support a government that in a few years' time could be killing millions of people, billions of people? Is that broadly?
Yes, I mean, I think we sociologically, this is a no-brainer, right? There's 3 categories. There's within the law, there's breaking the law, and then there's when the law's unconstitutional. That's not controversial. Lots of liberal scholars would say that, right? I mean, I'm broadly a liberal sort of guy, right? The question is which category are you in, right? And what I'm saying is the objective conditions are on the edge of the law, breaking the law, right? Logic, which is your logic, right? Which I agree with within that law. But there's also, you have to accept there's this third category, right? And this is a problem for the judiciary at the moment, as I'm sure you're aware, which is that they're prosecuting, climate protesters and pretending they're protesters, and people standing up in court and saying, no, what I did was not unlawful. It was legal because I got right to necessity, right? Which goes back to the 17th century. There are times, as all good police officers should know, when it is legitimate to break the law in order to prevent a greater amount of harm and what have you. And the classic example, if you don't know, is the fire of London, where people knocked down houses. They didn't go, didn't ask the owner. They knocked down houses to stop the fire from spreading. They weren't prosecuted for destroying private property, which, dare I say, is a big offence, right? Because there was a fire of London. And at the moment, we're heading towards 1 billion deaths in the next generation due to the explosion of heat on this planet. And there are people responsible for that. Are there not?
The interesting thing is we haven't got any senior colleagues serving from the Metropolitan Police. I think I've just worked out why they turned me down when I asked them. But I'm going to look at my two ex-Metropolitan Police colleagues and just say challenging the Constitution and actually stepping back. It's interesting what you said. I think the French policing is somewhat different, but the Dutch police is very much on the lines of policing UK style policing, but the French certainly a bit different. Napoleonic approach rather than, but the Dutch are very much on a similar line to us. So, Bob, you're sort of thinking of you about challenging the Constitution and not supporting.
My view is it's not the role of the police to change constitutions, but I think what you've all found, there are some robust discussions between senior officers and senior politicians about certain events, and I've had a few of those myself, and I've been challenged on some of my strategic intentions for big events by Home Secretaries. So, excuse me, since it's going to happen. But my concern is changing constitution is it's too flaky. There are no boundaries to it. So where do you stop it? And the reason that we as police obey the laws, and you bear in mind in the UK, once the laws are set, politicians cannot tell the police what to do or how to do it. They set the law, we make the laws happen in the streets. These policemen get stuff. Without those boundaries, which is what I always come back to, is lawful should be your starting point rather than peaceful. Because peaceful is just too widespread. And if I go back to those climate campers, they said, we're peaceful, we're not hurting anybody, we're going to be here for 24 hours. I then had a whole business community and people's lives and livelihoods depending on them getting to work. Poorer people who get paid peacetime, and if they don't turn up to work, don't get any money at all, so they're going to go and starve and go hungry. They're saying to me, why are you allowing these people to break the law, which is now affecting my life? So we come back to those decisions. And if we start to think about too much rewriting constitutions and a third category, where are the boundaries of that? And why would the Metropolitan Police have perhaps a slightly different view to the Scottish Police or the Greater Manchester Police? Without boundaries, policing doesn't work. And the boundaries of the police are the law. And in this country, the constitutional breakings, police officers take an oath not to politicians, but to the Crown. All of my life until the last year, we took an oath to serve the people of the Queen. And I still believe in that oath every day. When I go out, if I see something wrong, I support it, because I took an oath. I'm a London boy born and bred, so I love London. That's what we took an oath to, not to politicians, not to constitutions. Those are political decisions. I fully agree with you. I really do worry about what's happening. But if we start allowing the police to jump in on that as well and stretch what they do, so one day it might be a climate change issue, another day it's going to be another political issue. Where do you end up, Roger, without, we're going to turn up to work and say, which scene should we have today, guys? Let's put on census. There's going to be climate change, there's going to be racism, climate change. Where are we going, guys?
Well,
we have to do
can
all of
I
that,
just
but we
come
have
back
to do it within
come back
rules.
to that? You've got the real world is messy by definition, right? Which doesn't mean you can't use human intelligence to make a balanced decision. So you already have the messiness of when someone is breaking the law and when someone isn't in a protest situation. As you rightly said, technically speaking, if you put a tent on a road, you're already breaking the law. But you make a balanced decision that it's okay for this to happen for a few hours because it's not substantively, materially disrupting London, but it will be after, let's say, 5 hours.
Yeah.
When you say 5 hours, you're aware that there's a certain arbitrariness to it, but you have to make a decision, right? And you make that decision and then you defend it, but it's not objective, like it's substantively sensible, let's put it like that, right? According to that division between peaceful protest and illegal protest. The division between saying, as a police officer, I've made an oath to the Crown, as opposed to you as a politician, and in my judgment, what I'm being asked to do is unconstitutional. It's equally messy, but that does not mean it's impossible to make a balanced judgment. An example of this is when President Trump was trying to overturn the election, and as you may know, he spoke to some of the generals. I don't know the general details of it. You can imagine the conversation, which is the generals said to President Trump, with all due respect, our oath is to the American Constitution, it's not to you as president. And if you wish to continue to be president, all well and good, but we're not supporting that, right? We're not. So you constitutionally have the legal right to say to a politician, with all due respect, what you are asking us to do is, in our view, unconstitutional. It's not indisputable, but you can make that judgment. And what I'm saying to you is, let's not hide, right, between the projection of a total postmodernist analysis. You see what I'm saying? No one can know. We can know. It just means it's going to be difficult. And what I'm saying to you is, we need to adapt to a completely new situation, which is where we have an existential threat. But if we don't respond to that threat in time, we will have lost the ability to adapt to it, which is a hellishly difficult situation, because we're all sitting here, you know, we can go to Tesco's tomorrow and you can say to me, well, Roger, there's no climate problem. There isn't, is there? We're all doing fine, broadly speaking. Well, what I'm saying to you, having spoken to many of the world's leading scientists, is unless you have a substantive adaptation now, you'll lose it, right? There's this thing called tipping points. This is real physics. You will lose it, and in 10 years' time, when the British, police go, actually things are really bad, and we don't want to, police these protests because the world's falling apart. Scientists will come to the Met and say, with all due respect, should have done that 10 years ago. And that's an objective. This isn't ideology. It's not. You see what I mean? It's not. It's a physical situation. So what I'm saying to you is, you have the challenge to adapt to a situation that's never existed in the human race before.
So how then, Roger, should the police today react to the situation in the NHS where tens of thousands of people are dying unnecessarily, lack of funding, whatever you want to call it, and a current strike by surgeons, doctors, that are causing more and more people, thousands a day, to miss their appointments, which will mean, a bit like me, they will get cancer and they will die of the cancer unnecessarily. So what should the police do in that circumstance? Should they say, right, we're going to side with doctors, or should they support government? Where do we stand in that?
Okay, this is where you need to stand, right? You need to make an analytical difference between what is a substantive and material threat to the continuation of the British state and British society, and a situation where there's a social confrontation within society which is serious but not substantively threatening the continuation of the state and society. That's an analytical difference. So when you I support the doctors, I'm advising the doctors, I probably advise them to do civil disobedience, dare I say it, right? But not in a million years am I going to say to the doctors that their agenda is substantive enough that it's going to threaten the continuation of the British state.
But the logic of your argument, so let's say the doctors go out, whatever they're striking this week, trains tomorrow, isn't it? I lose stuff. Colleagues must be on off their feet at the moment. So doctors go out and they block the road outside University College Hospital grounds. As a Gold Commander, should I then tell them, I said, you know what, the NHS, this is ridiculous. Government, we are not going to police these protests. Just let them break the law, let them get on with it until you fund the NHS.
No, because you haven't listened to what I've just said, right? What I've said is, I agree with you. You should arrest them. If I go to the doctors and they say, right, we're going to block the bridges in London, and I say, yes, go and do it, because it's going to, raise the profile of your issue. When I'm speaking to a police officer, I'm not going to say to the police officer, dare I say, you shouldn't arrest them, because the whole purpose of the civil disobedience logic is you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law, and you're willing to be arrested, right? Because it's a political issue in the sense that they've got their opinion, they feel strongly about it, they're willing to be arrested because it's not threatening the state. What I'm saying to you is you have to be intelligent enough, with all due respect, to understand that the climate crisis is a super political issue. It's beyond politics, objectively.
It's not just the UK.
It's not the UK, but it's an existential threat to the state itself. And that means that you have to have an intelligent response to it as the police service. Like the Dutch police have said, like the deputy prosecutor of the Dutch state said 2 months ago, that he supported the civil disobedience because the civil resistance, as we would call it, is about defending the continuation of the Dutch state. In other words, half the country's underwater. In 30 years' time, it probably will be, there's going to be flooding. So it's a legitimate act to defend the constitution, right? So it's unique. It's a new category, right? Everyone in this room agrees that in Algeria, the police might and should, there's plenty of situations historically where the police should side with an uprising, like in 1989, for instance, right? So there's a category. What I'm saying to you is this category is unique in the human experience, right? Because we're not talking about dictators. What we're talking about is governments engaging in policies that are going to destroy their society objectively. And my challenge to you is you need to think seriously about that, morally because you want to defend the British Constitution, you want to have a liberal democracy, but also because the police's reputation from a communication strategy is under severe threat. Because if you continue to police civil disobedience, which is trying to protect the British state, you're not going to be looked upon very well by future people or even people in the near future. You see what I mean? Because it's a different category. Most people in the country are going to support you arresting doctors. Maybe not, but you're right to do it under the Constitution. But you're not right, to be blunt with you, you're not constitutionally on firm ground to arrest people who are in civil resistance against the government destroying the British state. And you can go and talk to Sir David King. Why don't you go and talk to him? He's the chief scientific officer. Go and listen to what he says. You've got 3 years to make the changes. Otherwise, we're going to lose our societies. But he's not a fringe figure, right? You don't get more establishment than the chief scientific officer of the British state. So you need to start thinking about this, right? I mean,
just on that point, we always talk about, we get this consensus and we're there to support the public. Do you think you've won the battle convincing the public? Because if there was public support for what you've just described, wider public support, I think it would make Bob's job as Bob's replacement, Bob Gold Commanders, it would make their job easy because they would have public support. Am I making sense?
yes.
Because I think you've got a battle to win the hearts and minds of the general public, as well as we have, as what the police service has. But I think your battle is probably harder because they see you blocking a road and it's I can't get to work. And it's that bigger picture is what you're describing.
Yes, but
But it comes back to the policing. No.
What? Sorry. Yeah, well, this gentleman here would come back to you and say, with all due respect, the job of police officers is not to be popular. The job of police officers is to fulfill the law.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's completely
Not the right
compatible.
constitution.
It's completely compatible with what I'm saying, right?
But Roger, I would come back at you again then. Okay, so if we looked at it, if I thought that 100% of the population fully backed what you say and were actively doing their bits about it, maybe you have a point. But look at electric car sales; they are dropping, they're plummeting by the minute. First of all, because the smoke that's kicked out producing the batteries and scraping all that lithium out to build the cars, but also economically they're not viable anymore. So people are going back to diesel and petrol, as I have just done. Yeah. So again, we follow your constitution. All those people out there who've been saying about it, why are the police siding with that side of the argument? Now I can't use my electric car, I can't do whatever, it's not a diesel car. We're suddenly got a third or a quarter or a half the population. The police are there to serve everybody. And the only way you can do that is to have a set of laws set by our politicians who the public vote for and can unvote for it. And then we have a police by a set of rules. I don't disagree with a lot of you say. What I do disagree with, you cannot start tinkering with how the police operate if they are to remain impartial and take that oath that they all take, that we all took, to support the people.
Yeah, but
That's
it's neither here nor there what the public think, as you well know, right? In terms of you fulfilling the law, right? Let's say 70% of the British public support the doctors. It doesn't matter. Your job as police officers is to fulfil the law. So you can't. You're contradicting yourself, because on the one hand you say I've got to follow the law, and then you're making various sociological and political observations about whether people support it. Well, we both know that's not the issue, right? That's not what we're talking about here. I think you're trying to avoid my main point, right?
I think you're trying to run rings around me because I'm a simpleton.
No. This is not complicated. It's emotionally very difficult. It's emotionally very difficult because we all want a nice, quiet life, don't we? You want to become police officers. You want to police protest. You want to go home at night knowing, it's a little bit unpopular, but the law's the law. That's easy. And what I'm saying is, guys, there's something called adaptation, and you're going to have to adapt to the third category. We've all accepted there is a third category, right? There's no one in this room that disagrees, I hope, there's a third category, which is when a government engages in unconstitutional action and the police service decides that they're not going to police protest, right? That does exist. The question for you...
It doesn't exist in the UK.
It doesn't exist in the UK.
No.
You can make that argument, but it exists through time and space, right? Different countries and different times.
If I could come in then, I think you conflate so many different issues, and you've picked different things from different parts of the world and said, therefore, that's what we should be doing here because we're off to hell in the handcar. First of all, I don't think it's the first time civilization faces. I grew up in the Cold War, where I understand we came very close a number of times to blowing ourselves into kingdom come because of the actions of the politicians. Attitudes and tangible things were changed because of protest, because of people making their views known, but also because of change in successive governments' approach to changing nuclear policy and war policy across the world. So we've sort of been here before. Your fundamental point, where you say, "Come on, you lot of cops, it's up to you to take on the constitution and make a stance here," I think it's fundamentally flawed. Two main reasons. One, that does happen in a lot of countries, and it's rarely happening for the good of the people, is it? It's happening for the good of those people that then decide they're going to take over or they're going to change the dictator. We rarely move from one dictator to a fully constitutional government. We move from the dictator to someone else's dictator. That's still there. You cannot apply that to the United Kingdom, where, like it or not, and like the current politics of the current government or all the previous ones since universal suffrage came in the UK, we can change our government. We have the opportunity to change that every 5 years or more often. I saw a programme last night when someone was saying, look at the mess the country's been in when we had 5 prime ministers in 4 years and, you know, change of the head of state. Someone actually said, well, that shows the constitution is working, because we managed to deal with that and take people that we thought were unsuitable to be prime minister and change them. And in about a year's time, we'll have an opportunity, if the public want, to change the entire fabric of the government. So don't conflate with what goes on in the rest of the world to what goes on in the UK. We are in a very, very different position. We do live in a liberal democracy where we can vote for our politicians and change them. And unlike many parts of the world, including America, the politicians abide by what's happening. And if they get voted out, they leave 10 Downing Street, so far. The other thing is about the constitutional position of the police. I, as a police officer, like Bob, took incredibly seriously my oath to the Crown, and I took it, had it up on my office wall for the entire time I had an office or a place to work in the police, because I knew that gave me the independence to do my job. If you think heated conversations don't go on between senior police officers and politicians of what you should and shouldn't be doing, I think you're very misguided. A lot of that will go on. But at the end of the day, the politicians that we elect make the laws. These laws are voted democratically through Parliament and are changed that way as well. When a different government comes in, they change the law and make things that were offences no longer offences, and vice versa. The day you suggest police
You silence the microphone, please.
The day that you suggest that police officers, in their role as police officer, should be taking on the government, their own form of civil disobedience that you like, I think we go to hell in a handcart. The time, if I felt so strongly that I couldn't police, then my job would be to leave the police and become a politician and use that avenue to try and change things. We are so lucky that we live in a country that is a liberal democracy where there is a clear demarcation between the executive and the legislative and the judiciary. And although, yeah, it gets mucked up at times and we get interference at different times, and I've certainly had politicians phone me up and say, can you do this please? And I've had to say no. The Mayor of London will try and interfere with operational decisions. You know, it happens. I've never lived in such a politicised time for the police as I have in the last 5 years. But at the end of the day, that demarcation is still there. And I think that's what makes our system so extraordinarily brilliant. All the stuff that goes well and all the stuff that goes well, so brilliant. And the moment someone like you comes along and says, you know, there's going to have to come a time when new police officers are going to have to stand up and say, no, they're not doing that. Well, maybe if I was living in some of the countries I see around the world where things are going on, you might think, well, okay, that might happen. But while I live in a liberal democracy of the United Kingdom, I can never foresee it happening, and it must never happen. And if it got anywhere near that position, then let's stop being police officers and let's become politicians and let's change it.
Any views, Beverley, or from sitting there?
I was just considering some of the history of some of the other events that we've talked about earlier today, and how that's affected policing. We talked about Notting Hill, and for our student colleagues, you know, looking at the history of where things have come and what Roger's saying. Excuse me if I'm croaking. What Roger's saying about the future, and you know, we're living in the future of what the history of Notting Hill now, and the fact that these people are coming out because of their history, that they're rebelling against authority. I'm not disagreeing with what's been said, but there's a lot to be said about the people and what we've learned in history, and the future of what will happen. And so just the parallels there of what the police have to deal with of past decisions of around the world, the global citizen that we're becoming now, with what's going on in the future. So I just put that in balance of, I know I don't expect the police to do anything different with the liberal society that we live in, but I just think there's some parallels there to look at history and learning from that and the future for the police, and that balance, definitely.
I mean, we've gone completely off of a tangent, as you did warn me you might do, but and it's got very political. No, it's good. It's really good. I just want to come back just to give the sort of back to the communication and just think in terms of. I was really interested to hear you had a really good reception from the police in London in your Extinction Rebellion process at the start. Can I just ask why that was? Is it because you put the effort in, as I think you described, but then it's not so good at other locations across the country for the spontaneous protest, if I understood you correctly? Was that fair?
Well, I think 2019 was a bit of a unique moment because it was at the. I mean, I'm not a total expert on the Metropolitan Police, but broadly speaking, it seemed to be a moment where the Metropolitan Police was at a peak of sensible policing, as I would call it, which is you've got a protest, you go and talk to the people. And I had lots of conversations with my co-person, as it were, in the Metropolitan Police, and there was some stuff, jokes about things, my idea, all very nice. But and it was also a unique moment where you had a new social movement that was very well organised and you had a partner, you see what I mean? You know, they always used to say to me, no surprises, and I was going, cool, no surprises from you as well, right? There was a no surprise rule on both sides. So for me, like, that was the height of what you might call, organised communication. Since then, it started to go down. And that's partially because of the frustration of people in the private space when nothing's happening. And, I'm not going to make glaring sort of predictions, but,
because there hasn't been a change.
There's been no change on this situation, which is objectively unconstitutional, right? And also, there's been political pressure on the police. Again, I don't know the minutiae of it, but I think it's a broadly correct thing, particularly with changes in the law, but also in policing practice, just to go in there and do stuff without, the subtleties that there used to be. So at the moment, there's a growing tension. That's what I'm observing, particularly in London, between protests that are getting increasingly restricted because of legislation. And I don't think many of the police support that legislation, but you can tell me. And also the intensity of the emotion coming from the protest space, partially because of austerity and social inequality and all the rest of it, but also because of the intensity of the communication from the science community on what's going to happen to our societies in the next 10 or 20 years if there are structural changes. And obviously it doesn't help we have a government that's, psychotically ignores the science, as you might say. So, that's something that is it's a big problem on both sides of us here.
Okay, so it's, I think from our perspective, because Bob and I certainly aren't there, and Simon, 4 months ago, I don't know if you sort of 2019 onwards, was there a subtle change in the way we approached events? Can you sort of, without giving, put names on it, obviously?
I think, do we not react to ongoing situations? So, for as much as you're praising how nice the police were to work with, etc., we had a huge amount of aggravation from the public about, why were we clearing you all out of the roads? Why were we allowing this? Why were we being nice? The job of the police is to do it. And that, probably, a far larger number of people doing that than people saying, what an excellent job you're doing in bringing central London to a standstill. On top of that, we have the political situation where we were saying, well, we don't really have the laws. We tried obstruction, and obstruction had been thrown out by the High Court eventually. So we're going to the politicians and saying, well, if you want us to deal with it, give us the laws to deal with it. They then gave us the laws to deal with it. And I think the approach, again, from what I've seen in the media from your organisation, the approach has been quite sensible. We've gone along, we've had a chat, given you conditions, we've asked you to come on the pavement, by and large you've come on the pavement, and so the protesters are civilly disobedient. So I'd like to test what the difference is between those two things as well, if we have a chance, Roger, have complied. So as ever, the Metropolitan Police, British police, are extraordinarily liberal when you look at police officers right across the world. We have this amazing thing called discretion. And, you know, I really can stop someone and entirely of my own decision decide to give them a ticket for speeding or just say, can you watch the speed? And that can be extravagant. Nowhere in law does it say I must arrest anybody for anything, actually. You know, all our powers are discretionary. And we almost fall over ourselves backwards to do that, because we really do believe that people should be allowed to, lawful, I utterly agree with you, Bob, the word should be lawful, to take part in their lawful activity, including protest, because protest has changed the world, protest has changed the UK for the good many, many times. But at the same time, everybody else, including me, got to get about and, you know, carry out my lawful life, to get to work or to go shopping or whatever it is. And as ever, we're in the middle of doing those two things. Now, do I think there's been a bit of a change? I think there's been a bit of a change under the current commissioner in terms of a more didactic approach across a range of things, including public order and the current cadre of senior public order. Whether that's to do with the personality of the police officers in charge, and personalities do count, they change. You know, we get, as different people take command in any situation, including the police, there is a change to the nuance. Whether they are bowing under political pressure for one reason or another, I don't know. You'd have to ask the individuals. But sometimes I can, you know, as an observer, I can see that's interesting that we've changed that position. And how will that change with a different Home Secretary, different Prime Minister, different Mayor of London, etc. And sometimes it's the practicalities of it. In that, you know, there's what, 10 million people live in London, and there's 32,000 police officers, and on a good day at any one stage we might have 2,000 or 3,000 officers actually out there on the street doing it. So part of being a senior police officer and a gold commander is being pragmatic about what you can do to solve the problem. But forever in my mind is, yeah, you've got your rights as just as civil disobedience, but the rest of the public got their rights too. And I'm in the middle, just trying to orchestrate that and let everybody get on with their lives in the best way. And sometimes that's straightforward, and sometimes it isn't. But what Bob said about my final point about individuals who have to make decisions, you know, when you've sat there, Bob, and decided this is what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, that's brilliant. But also, the wonderful thing really is that he's been held accountable for that, sometimes over many, many years, and it's terribly troublesome for us as individuals, but for society, it's pretty brilliant because it protects the public, it protects those who are protesting, it protects police officers as well. But no one in this country, and I've worked in other countries where the Prime Minister will pick up the phone to the Commissioner and say, do that. In this country, that really doesn't happen unless the Commissioner says, yeah, all right then. Then that's an issue between two individuals rather than constitutionally. Does that sort of make sense?
And it's probably worth bringing in this case, Roger. I think one of the differences between the police and protesters is that accountability piece. So I said right from the start, I mean, I was actually investigated more often as a commander than any rank in my career, including being interviewed under caution for the death of the autonomous. I wasn't arrested, but I was interviewed under caution. But did my strategy somehow lead to his death? So that could have had implications, you know, for me quite seriously. But just to tell you, we got an online question about why wasn't discretion used at the candlelit vigil during COVID, those awful issues about murder. And the honest answer is I don't know. That we'll come back to the decision making because it goes into the heart of communication. What everybody saw and remembers from that candlelit vigil is the alleged, I'm not going to say brutality, the overzealous use of force of young girls, you know, being arrested and taken away by 4 or 5 officers at a time. And then the Home Secretary, and this is where I don't think police any longer get the support policy from the Home Secretary actually signing with that, saying which is outrageous.
And the Mayor of London.
And the Mayor of London. And I actually felt like ringing around saying, actually, Home Secretary, they are only doing what your photography because Home Office guidance dealing with a protester who's non-compliant is to have 4 of us, 1 take an arm each, 1 take a leg each, and 1 guide the head. So you do not hurt that person and turn away if they refuse to comply and get up and walk away, which they have the right to do. So in my view, it looked messy, but it was actually following guidance, following training. I've been held accountable in the G20. I was asked a question about police officers seeing and hitting people, and I said, that I was the Gold Commander. I take responsibility, but I haven't seen anybody do anything that I haven't trained them to do. And I'm not seeing senior police officers. To come back to the question,
Could I just make one comment on that, Bob, just about that particular thing? I think I don't know whether it's the beauty of policing or the worry about policing, in that happened in that way because of one goal strategy. Had another goal commander been in charge, then it might not have happened. That might have been the strategy is let them all get on with it. We're not going to interfere.
so here's the point I just like you to reflect on, and everybody for that matter. So why wasn't discretion used of that kind of the Gold Commander? Rogers actually started this following the cartoon protest. In the old days, when I first started doing public order, no respectable senior officer would write anything. Because they would tell me, well, don't write anything down there, because if you write something down, they'll use it against you. So we didn't write anything down. Then we had to start writing strategies, quite right. But a strategy, a strategic document, initially would be 4 or 5 bullet points. Preserve life, keep peace, prevent crime. And that was it. We then had the cartoon protest about Hamid, magazine, when Roger, defending the Metropolitan Police's integrity and stuff like that, was asked, okay, so you had these 6 bullet points, well, what was your rationale for each of those? So then we now add rationale to that. Strategic intention is what we're going to do, we have 7 bullet points, and then we have some rationale as to why. And the Gold Commander writes that. And the Gold Commander is the overall decision maker. Now, on that night, the Gold Commander would have seen them. He would have reflected on the nature of the issue, i.e. we're here to protest against a wicked police officer doing something like that, a shooting, of course. But I always say, there are no right or wrong decisions. There are good or bad outcomes, potentially. The Gold Commanders, anybody for that matter, even the PC on the ground, can only make decisions based on what they knew at the time. And it's not just facts, but it's also the background, whatever else is happening. So all this speculation afterward, why wasn't this question used? Wasn't this? Nobody can answer that. But the Gold Commander can be held to account, as I have been and others have been several times. And again, if you read the 80-page Jelly's ruling on the royal wedding, it says almost at the beginning, they've read Commander Broadhurst strategy, and it says right up front, we will allow protests. Because that was the whole case against us, is that we stopped protests. They said, well, we haven't. We will allow it. That was in the strategy. And my briefing was, we will allow it. And every document therein had that place of the strategy. So communication, I come back to, this is what we're trying to achieve at this event. The dialogue has got a lot better. The public order policing is a bit of a pendulum. Sometimes we're in favour, sometimes we're doing too much. We never seem to get it absolutely right all the time. That's because other circumstances will change.
And actually, at times, Bob, I'll just bring in the media bit just to cover off some of the things. We don't win that sort of media portrayal of why we've done something, what we've done about it, and what our thinking was, because we're frightened quite often into saying too much too early. And by the time we do get out there, it's past. It's chip paper. It's gone. It's not chip paper anymore. They don't use it's all on social media, isn't it? So, but. And also the other thing that always frightens me is the couple of clips. You get a phone. You'll be in this world. You get a clip of something. Police officer doing something that looks completely outrageous, but actually, and that's posted and it's circulated. But actually, if you looked at the whole picture, the period of time, and what led to that, which we're very slowly getting out there still today. There's information there, or there's pictures there that would defend the action of that individual or police. And I think, we still haven't conquered that space.
And it's a really difficult one because actually, it's not our job to try and make ourselves look good.
No,
it's not our job to discredit other people at that stage. Our job is to make sure that if an offence has been committed, a person is exposed to the criminal justice system, and they go on to get a fair trial. And if they should be convicted of what they did, they should be convicted, and if not, vice versa. But sometimes that takes, years, longer now because of the hold-up. So, do we show the whole thing and prejudice the trial? Because it makes us look quite not so bad or better or good or whatever, or do we say, well, sorry, the important thing is 2 years' time, this has got to be shown at court, and that person deserves a fair trial.
But it is that communication with the public and how we actually.
I urge you to always just put everything out there and make people make a decision.
Yeah.
But, that will prejudice the trial, and and again, is our job to make us look good, or is our job to allow people to be exposed?
The worst thing I think you can do in terms of policing is not say anything to the media, because the media, in whatever form now, will always fill that vacuum for it, and politicians will try, and that's actually exactly what happened after 2020. We didn't fill that void quickly enough.
No.
We didn't counter the arguments of police officers masking up, police officers faking their records, and all sorts of other stuff, all of which was easily countered. The reason we didn't do that is because it was not long after the shooting of John Shelton NF when the commissioner at the time had to fall on his sword, because he put some facts out there that turned out later to be wrong. And that was because he was poorly briefed, because he was briefed from too many different sources. Too many senior people within there who were trying to have a handle on this gave him different bits and bobs. The message he gave out was found to be wrong later on. Similarly, in some ways, and the learning point from that, and this is where the has been. The learning point from that was, whenever we did a big event like that, is to make sure that what we said to the media, whatever that media, going back a number of years, so it was less social on mainstream television. We only had one version of the truth. And that's the stance that I'm going to take with COVID sits. You have one briefing note. It may come from multiple sources. You'll have a briefing officer will take those sources and then come to Gold and say, this is what we want to put out to the media. Gold commander, whoever he or she could be. Then have one version of the date and time. Saying if you had too many different versions coming out from the police, that's where you take yourself. If you don't ask for questions, if you don't go in, bearing in mind all the caveats that Simon said, you are limited to what you said, but you've got to say something. And the honest thing I would say is be open and honest. I made the decision at the time. This is what I did. This is what I knew. This is what I did. If I'm bound to be wrong, if you look at the BBC news coverage of again G20, the police authority member, my police authority member said on television, I should be sacked. Very much. But this is what I did. This is why I did it. If my police authority say I'm wrong, well, that's it. Not what the media say.
We haven't got long left, and I do want to give the audience a couple of minutes just to think about, have you got any questions? I'll just going to give Beverley, who is our academic, but she's also got a sort of sporting events type hat. One of her background. And I just wondered if there's any issues from some of the protests that we've seen at sporting events. If you just wanted to highlight the challenges that presents to not just the police service, but the wider security stewarding framework.
Yeah, so there's lots of research on the safety of crowds and how we design with safety advisory groups. We plan our events for safety with our environment, our strategies, and understanding our audiences and our crowd, the individuals within them. And those plans, we spend months, sometimes years, planning them. Notting Hill's a 3-year cycle. Notting Hill's a yearly cycle. Glastonbury's a 3-year cycle. The football season is just an ongoing event, and we plan these strategies. And sometimes the environment, if you can think of a door and the amount of people that have to get out of the door, it restricts us. And if we have an additional restriction via a protest that's not planned for, we don't know about that. That can cause a safety issue, and that's where we then have decisions at gold level and silver level of immediacy for safety reasons of other people, and that can cause that different dynamic. So when we've got a protest in the street that we know about, then we can deal with it. We understand it. We can make a strategy and agree a strategy of how long that will be. But if we don't know about it and it's within an environment where we've got crowds of people, then that decision becomes a quicker, dynamic decision for safety reasons. And we've seen it in the Rugby World Cup in France at the moment, you know, getting people into the stands for ticketing. And that's because sometimes the security issue hasn't been counted into the time frame of getting people through access and egress. Well, if you put a protest along that, then you can often cause dynamics. And that also can cause people to perhaps run away from violence that they think is happening, that perception of what's happening, and can cause some real, we see crowd pressures all the time. So yeah, from science point of view of psychology, of knowing how your crowd behaves and the environment and planning for that, can cause us real issues in those environments.
Stuff happens.
Stuff happens, absolutely. And we try and plan for everything, else we wouldn't be good emergency managers, but yeah, absolutely, it can cause real issues in those situations.
Do you target sporting events because the TV cameras are there and it's an opportunity to get your message out there? Is it as simple as that, or?
Well, I haven't got much to say about all the tactical discussions. You know, I mean, it sounds reasonable to me. You know, I'm not here today to start putting my finger into the minutiae of police because I'm not an expert on it. What I'm here to say today is that in the campaigning community, we have identified there's a fundamental difference between the climate crisis and every other issue. And what I'm hearing from all of you, with all due respect, is a resistance to using your abundant intelligence to analyse a phenomenon properly. And, you know, what my request is, not just because I'm on the other side of the fence, as it were, as a campaigner, and not just because I love this country arguably as much as you do, but for the strategic continuation of the interests of the police force, you need to attend to the nature of what we're facing. And it's not good enough, with all due respect, to say there's a dictatorship scenario, which is those bad people over there, and then there's our license to liberal democracy. That was true 10, 20 years ago. But there's a third category of a social situation, which is in 2023, with a very material possibility of massive social confrontation and collapse happening in the next decade. And you can concretise this by thinking about food and shortages of food, and how we know historically that public order breaks down enormously quickly when people either are hungry or are fearful of being hungry. We had a little glimmer of that, didn't we, in the first days of COVID, right?
Yeah.
And if I was a police strategist, I'd be going, that's not good, you know, because it takes you into a different paradigm of policing when people are fearful of their fundamental need to eat, for instance. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that people in this room will have to deal with food riots in the next 10 years. And that's what I've been told by the world's leading scientists, right? I'm not trying to I'm being honest with you, right? And you, the leaders within the police force, the strategists, you have to do strategy. And we all know what strategy means in this room, right? Strategy is not looking at the short term and the individual plays. The first question of strategy is what are the long-term threats to our organisation and our values? And what I'm suggesting is that the police, like it are doing in Holland, you spend some time to get people in the room who are experts on the climate crisis and speak to you for a minimum of 2 hours. Because I obviously sound ridiculous saying, oh, there's going to be food riots in front of people, a ridiculous statement, right? But you don't know, do you? Don't know. So that's what I would ask you to do. You know, be very kind and very clever, as it were, bringing me in today. very British, isn't it? Because it wouldn't happen in France, you know. So I wasn't protesting, you know, the enemy. I'm not the enemy, you know I'm not the enemy, but I'm not in agreement with you either, right? It's this nuanced relationship we have, right? I'm not going to go out and stop telling people not to break the law. You know that there's limits within which I work and there's limits within which you work, which is why we can have dialogue, right? But I'm saying, like, there's a massive imperative for the police force to start thinking, particularly you as leaders, I'm not quite sure how important you are, but I've seen very important, to get together and say, okay, let's look at this, right? Let's spend 2 hours. We have a duty to these younger generation people to actually see what's happening.
I don't disagree with any of that. I would actually say those conversations within policing are being had, and they're being had at the chief officer level. And as you said, there is a counterpart of you know, the policing, and they will have those discussions because they are clever people, much cleverer than Simon Roger. That's where they got to be chief person and so on. And they shape the future of policing, and they will have those conversations with politicians. But I come back to that's for those decisions to have. The issues you talk about are political. Policing is not political. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, will have a different view on all of this. They will come from all ends of the spectrum of politics. But as police officers, we had to leave that behind. So you can have your political views, you can read whatever papers you like, but you cannot belong to a political party, and you cannot go on strike. Because you have taken that. And for me, that's why we need the framework of the law. And all this talk about changing constitutions, peaceful, you know, rather than lawful, all it's going to do is blur the edges of policing and make issues a lot worse for everybody. Because I can turn and say, actually, I'm going to go on this political bit. I'm a left-wing bias or a right-wing bias, you know, and I'm going to do it this way.
Can I just ask you? Let me ask you a question. If it was a meteorite coming towards London, would that be a political issue?
That's not.
That political issue?
What's that got to do?
I'm just asking you, right? You know, every now and again, a meteorite.
Well, we don't know. It may be caused by the Chinese or the Russians or something.
No. Don't change the scenario. There's a scenario. There's a meteorite coming towards London.
We used to have planning things like this, and we discounted that because it's a 1 in a several hundred billion chance. Let's talk about the reality. It's not meteorites crashing into London.
In other words, you don't want to answer the question.
Well, no, what the question is.
I've asked you the question, right? In the eventuality of a meteorite heading towards London and going to destroy the city, would you categorise that as a political issue or as a national emergency, for instance?
I'd say it's a pending disaster. Yeah, it would be as I could.
No, but we would have years of notice, as we have now, and it's political, what we would have done about it.
But it is also a national emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would do everything we
Yes.
could
And with the
in order
framework
to.
to deal with them.
Yeah,
Exactly. So you're being honest with me. Obviously, it's not an issue of politics. It's a national emergency. It's a straightforward, nothing to do with politics. Politics is like you've got your interests, I've got my interests, and we battle it out. There is a category of threat which is not political. Like Hitler wasn't political in that sense, right? Everyone knew Hitler was going to invade Britain and terrible things were going to happen. What I'm saying is, I'm challenging you to be honest with yourselves. The climate crisis is not political in that sense. It's existential. It's a national emergency. The sovereign body in this country, as you well know, accepted that it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, there is a realm of being beyond politics.
But we don't have to change the constitution to deal with the meeting
Things
outrageous.
We've only got 5 minutes left. Let's see if our younger generation, the audience, have anything that they would like to add or question from their perspective. Just give them the opportunity. We got anyone? Go on.
With obviously you've compared to the meteorite, the climate crisis as being like a national emergency. With all the planning and all the changes that we could make as a country, what realistic difference would it make in terms of the grand scale of things? Because it's obviously a global issue rather than just a British issue. With all the changes we could make, would it actually make a difference if every other country in the world also didn't make the same changes we did?
And to the start, I would also like to ask, how are we going to make a difference and save the world
if we go carbon neutral tomorrow, if what we produce annually is equal to what China produce within 2 weeks, CO2 wise.
Well, what I would say is as existing or future police officers, that's not the issue. The issue is, as we've discussed, is to uphold the law, and when the law violates the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution. That's what your oath is going to be. And what I'm saying is regardless of whether you're going to have an effect or not, you've got a solemn responsibility to defend the British state, the Crown. And if you receive information, objective information, that the Crown state is coming under an existential threat, whether that's a human threat or a natural threat, you have a responsibility as a police officer to say to the politicians, I am here to protect the Crown, not to fulfil your law, which is going to facilitate the destruction of British society. If that is the case, right? If it's not the case, these gentlemen, these people are right. You know, I'm completing the issue by putting it to you that you're being dishonest.
I think it's giving you something to think about in the future, because you are the future. It's not us sitting here. You are the future. So somewhere amongst you, there are some senior officers, and I think the question is, start thinking about it now. I'm going to stop there, mainly because Bob Jarman has come back into the room, which is a hint that it's coming to an end, and I've just looked at the time. So I'd like to thank you, I thank our audience, I thank the audience online, and I'd like to thank all four of you for taking part in this panel and having such an interesting debate. I didn't expect you to